All I remember before discovering the disappearance of my biology lab was seething anger and absolute desperation as I drove recklessly towards my university. As much as I wished I could tell customers to eat shit as soon as my shift was over, I really didn't want to lose this job. So instead, I continued to diligently and anxiously run the cash register until my replacement came strolling in the door 10 minutes late. I shot her a death glare as I left, but I don't think she picked up on it. After driving so poorly that I almost crashed, I parked just as poorly in the garage and ran to class. I was only 20 minutes late so far, and if I ran up the stairs instead of taking the elevator, I could save some more time. By the time I finally got to the third floor, I was only slightly winded. I was not a particularly athletic person, but I could handle a few flights of stairs. While I briefly stopped at the top of the stairs to catch my breath, I noticed that girl again. Last time she had been anxiously sitting on the floor, but now she was lying there dead asleep with her arms stiff in front of her. Her hands had been bandaged, and I considered checking to see if she was alive. But my itchy feet got the better of me, and I ignored her as I continued my mad dash to class. When I finally made it, I was dumbfounded. The lab itself was completely normal. The lights were on, materials were taken out like they were going to be used, and instructions were written on the board. It was the complete and total absence of any human in the room that sent my mind reeling. I noticed that a hot plate was still on, and whatever was inside it was violently boiling. As I went to turn it off, I noticed a handful of micropipettes on the ground. After turning the hot plate off, I went to look at them. It was incredibly odd. Micropipettes are actually a small machine. Since liquids and mechanics don't mix well, they hold the solution in a small plastic tip you pop off and dispose of when done. The thing about the tips of pipettes, at least in this lab, is that they popped off if you dropped the pipette even just a foot. A fact I only know after accidentally contaminating my workstation many times. All of the pipettes on the ground still had their plastic tip on, and half of them still had liquid in them. When I first walked in, the thought that my entire class was smote by God in the middle of the lab crossed my mind. But now it felt more like they stopped whatever it was they were doing, placed their equipment on the nearest available space, and simply walked out of the room. Still, with no one in here, it's possible this wasn't my class. I checked the time and class number again, and yep, this was my class. I then checked my email to see if it had been moved to another room, or maybe if there had been some disaster warning, but found nothing. I tried sending my TA an email, but the system couldn't find her contact. I brushed off the feeling of dread by reminding myself that my internet connection here was spotty. I then checked every room in the building, and aside from one math class, I couldn't find any other classes taking place. I wasn't entirely sure what to do, so I decided to go home, where I knew the internet worked, and email my TA telling her that, for some reason, I didn't get the memo that the lab had been moved or canceled today. On the way home, my dread continued to mount. My rational explanations were slowly losing their ability to convince me that there was a grounded explanation for all this. Even if there was a disaster, surely everyone could take a single step to put their pipettes down on the desk or make sure that the hot plate was off. I almost wished that the plastic pipette tips had been broken off. Sudden rapture was less unsettling than the image of everyone so transfixed but still mentally capable that they put everything on the ground carefully before leaving. When I got to the apartment, my mom was standing behind the kitchen counter wiping it off. Friday evening was the last trace of her free time, and I had told her repeatedly that I could take care of the housework over the weekend and that she should just relax, but she never listened. Casey, my adopted sister, was sitting in the adjoining living room, half watching TV and half coloring. When my mom noticed I was home, she said, "You're home late, Trevor. It's nearly 9, and why are you lugging your backpack around? I hope you're not trying to smuggle something into the house. You're doing it poorly as well. Too conspicuous." I struggled to find any words at all to her statement. Was my mother suffering from early onset dementia? I think you mean I'm home early. Really, Mom, I think you need to take a vacation. All this work is getting to you. Class usually ends late. It is Friday after all, did you forget? I uttered this question shakily, trying to steady my voice so she couldn't tell that what she said had absolutely rattled me. Casey suddenly took an interest in the conversation and asked, "Why are you shaking, Trevor?" "Ooh, maybe Auntie was right and you did something bad. You should have stayed home and colored with me." Casey then proudly showed me her handiwork. Usually I'd lightly tease her for her messy coloring, but until she had mentioned it, I hadn't noticed that I was physically shaking. I could tell my mom was starting to go from confused to concerned, so I mumbled an excuse and went back to my room. My room was actually just a strangely deep closet, with a twin mattress on the floor, the few items I owned on the shelves at the top, and both my dirty and clean clothes hanging over me. At the time my mom officially adopted my cousin Casey, I offered to live in the linen closet. It was that or share a room with a 6-month-old. I thought I had gotten used to the confines of this place and, in recent years, thought of it as kinda nice. But in my shaken-up state, I just felt absolutely claustrophobic. I pulled my shitty laptop out of my bag and logged into Blackboard. My worst fears were coming true. Not only did my class simply vanish from the dashboard, but the heading that was created indicating that I had been enrolled in any summer classes at all was gone. I took my phone out and texted my best friend Nathan. We were part of a friend group that included a girl named Carla, who was also in my lab. "Hey Nathan, this may be a weird question, but you remember Carla, right? Sorry if I sound crazy." A few moments later, he sent me a reply. "There was that girl in our 5th grade class, Big Horse Girl. Man, I hadn't thought of her in ages." I felt my hands shake hard enough that typing was becoming challenging. I responded, "No, not her. Carla, the one we met in college, the one we were both sleeping with." Nathan took a second to respond. "What the fuck are you talking about? Trev, are you fucking with me? Be serious with me. You know I've been dating Jill since freshman year. Why would I sleep with her best friend?" "You're dating Jill?" I asked. "Bro, can you even read? Our conversation about proposing to her was literally our last convo. I know you're Mr. Straight A student, but I think you're studying too late or something." "Maybe you're right." I ended the conversation and scrolled through our texts. About 75% of them were ones I had remembered, albeit vaguely. The other 25 were completely new, and all of them replaced conversations centered around Carla. Not only was any memory of her erased, but any memory that would be spotty without her had been completely rewritten. Every text conversation with members of my friend group was like this. The group chat was the worst though. Her responses were still there. The senders of the texts were simply substituted out for whoever had the personality most matching the response. It was mostly Jill, but I saw a few that I supposedly had sent. I texted Jill. She was Carla's childhood friend after all. Our relationship wasn't the talking type, but I at least knew that. "Jill, please tell me you still remember Carla." She didn't even bother to text me. Instead, she called me as soon as she read the text. Thank fucking God, I felt like I was going crazy. I had been chatting with some of the girls from the volleyball team and I don't know when, but it was like a switch flipped. I had mentioned her a couple times since we're roommates and all, and that was okay. Then suddenly I mentioned her, and they all gave me this look like I had gone nuts. When I asked why, they were all like, Jill, you live alone. And I asked them if they could tell me the story I just told back. It was supposed to be bitchy, because Carla was in the story I just told. But then they told me a completely different story, one I had literally never experienced, let alone shared. Anyways, I looked around online afterwards and all traces of her are just gone. Poof. I messaged a bunch of people she was friends with and no one remembers her at all. I also messaged her mom and her parents still remember her, thankfully. I listened to Jill as she told her story in a frenzied manner. Then she asked me a question. Hey Trev, no offense, but why do you remember Carla? I asked a bunch of people about her but didn't bother to ask you since you two didn't seem especially close. It's the biology lab the two of us were taking. I got to class late and when I got there it was just bizarre. It's like they all got up and left. Then when I got home, my mom had completely forgotten that the class existed. I asked Nate about her and he didn't remember, said he was dating you.
Lab? What lab? Carla was only taking microeconomics. I wish she was taking something else so all her stories weren't about her old-ass professor. And yeah, I've been dating Nate since forever.
Jill, do me a favor. If Nate has been dating you, surely you have something physical that proves it, right? A sweatshirt, a sock, anything at all. Nate is a messy dude. Surely he's left something behind.
You think my memories have been fabricated too?
I know your memories are false because just last week Nate was telling me that if I don't start publicly dating Carla, he would.
Okay, that's scary. Let me look around.
I heard the muffled noises of a room being ransacked as Jill looked for something. This went on for a while before she started talking again.
Jesus Christ, you're right. He was here last night, and I even dug through the trash to find the takeout we ate, and it's just gone. What do we do? Maybe if we look in the lab, we will find something. This is fucking with my head. Will tomorrow work for you?
Yeah, I have an early shift, so I can probably make it around 4. Actually, scratch that. I'll call out sick. Let's meet at 10.
Okay, see you then.
With our plans made, the conversation ended abruptly, and I hung up the phone. I doubted we would find anything, but it was comforting that there was at least one other person who knew something was wrong. I reached up and turned off the light. I didn't bother to change. I just wanted it to be tomorrow already. Of course, sleep never comes easily when something like this happens. I let my mind wander. It seemed as if you were close to someone who vanished. You were resistant to having your memories stolen. I had the gnawing feeling that, while it made you resistant, it didn't make you immune. I considered calling Jill again and telling her to meet me earlier, but decided against it. I made it to school an hour early. I had sat down on a bench outside the building my lab was in and waited. As I sat and waited, I enjoyed the peace and quiet of campus on the weekend. I was in the shade, and it was nice. There was a small group of high schoolers taking a tour, and I listened in as the guide explained the wonders of college life to them. Then all of a sudden, someone ran through the crowd. It was weird. Not a single one of them acted like someone had almost barreled them over. One of them fell over after being pushed out of the way, but his friends just made fun of him for tripping while standing still. I got up and chased the person who just ran through the crowd. I couldn't remember his name, but I knew it was someone else from my class. God damn, he was fast and he had a head start. He was going in a straight line, pushing people out of the way as he ran and narrowly dodging street lamps. I hadn't managed to get any closer to him when he ran out into the middle of a busy intersection. I watched him get hit by a truck. He went flying into the air, and the truck slammed its brakes upon hearing the impact but seeing nothing. I could hear other cars honk in confusion while I watched him hit the ground lifeless. He lay there for maybe a second before pulling himself back to his feet and continuing his run straight forward. The truck began to drive again, and I stood at the edge of the crosswalk catching my breath. After that, I slowly walked to my bench and resumed waiting for Jill. Jill was late. Very late. When I was considering shooting her a text, I finally saw her. She was walking towards me, looking confused and kind of dazed. I felt my heart drop. Had she already forgotten Carla? God damn it, I knew I should have scheduled it earlier. I walked up to Jill and asked her if she remembered Carla. The response she gave me was worse than I was expecting. Do I know you?" she asked, completely confused with a hint of fear. "Jill, it's me, Nate's best friend. We were going to meet up here to look into the disappearance of your roommate, remember?" "Roommate? I live alone." She had begun to give me a look that told me she wanted to get out of this situation as soon as possible. Before she could leave, I asked her, "Just one last thing. Do you know why you came here?" I could see a brief moment of recognition in her eyes that quickly faded before she quietly muttered, I don't know. I just had this feeling I needed to be..." She suddenly stopped talking and grasped her head like she had a headache before very coldly continuing, "I'm sorry, sir. I'm not interested in anything you're selling," and walking away. I slumped down on the bench and pulled out my phone. As I expected, nearly every single text I had been deleted. All the pictures I had with my friends were gone, and for the first time ever, my email inbox was completely empty. Even junk mail had vanished. The only person I still had a record of communication with was my mom. When I got home, my mom could tell I was going through something, but decided not to press. I made dinner for the three of us because Mom had the closing shift at a local grocery store and had been grading essays all day. I was never very good at cooking, but having a task to do was soothing. As we sat at the dinner table, my mom did her usual routine of sharing silly things her students had written. Casey looked abnormally deep in thought and wasn't eating, instead pushing the food around with her fork. Eventually, whatever it was she was thinking about finally ate through the small amount of patience and tact that she had. She abruptly dropped her fork and pointed at me, asking with the bluntness only a child could have, "Auntie, who is that?" Although we were cousins, Casey and I were basically siblings. She never called my mom Mom out of deference to a mother she couldn't possibly remember, but she did constantly remind me that I was the best or worst big brother ever, depending on how she felt. Having my friends forget me was scary, but Casey forgetting me was heartbreaking. I balled my hands into fists in an attempt not to tear up. Everything we had was gone. The initial year of resentment as a teenager, this baby I did not want and who needed constant attention, was thrust into my life without me even getting a say in it. Then came the gradual realization that Casey didn't ask for her parents to die in a freak accident any more than I asked for her to be here. Once that realization hit, I realized how much I had wanted to be an older sibling all this time. I never got tired of answering her unending stream of questions while her eyes glittered and she crowed about how smart I was, but one day she was going to be smarter. Looking after her in high school while my mom was at work probably stopped me from becoming so bitter with my lot in life. I kept clenching my fists as hard as I could, not caring about the pain. I wished with everything in my heart that I had spent last night playing with her instead of doing this pointless research. To tease her one last time or give her one last piece of advice. My palms were starting to bleed as I realized how much I had lost. Even if we started over now, she could never learn how to ride a bike from scratch. She could never proudly show me her first ever test grade. Everything was gone. My mother, unsurprisingly, was immediately concerned. "Casey, if you're joking, it's not very funny. Trevor is having a bad day, so let's be nice." "Oh, his name is Trevor. Is he here to fix the funny noise the toilet makes?" My mom, sensing that Casey was absolutely not acting, as she was a terrible liar, stood up and said, "I'm going to call my manager and tell him I can't go in. We are taking Casey to the hospital immediately." "I don't want to go to the hospital. They'll make us wait forever, and the waiting room only plays those boring soapy operas," Casey protested. I wanted to tease her, to tell her that a child presenting with apparent brain injuries would be triaged and seen immediately, to explain the concept of triage to her as best as I could. Instead, I said nothing. I felt like anything I said to her would mean absolutely nothing coming from a stranger. Instead, I got my shoes on and asked Casey very politely if she could put her shoes on. When she refused, my mom, who had finished with her call, came and put her shoes on for her. The short drive to the hospital was tense. Casey spent the entire time complaining, and my mom was gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. I stared out the window, trying not to think about anything. As expected, Casey was seen almost immediately. The entire time in the hospital, I felt completely invisible. Every time the nurse walked in, she briefly looked startled to see me. When she brought in blankets and water, she only brought in enough for 2 people. The only one who acknowledged my existence was my mom, and even she seemed to talk to me less and less. Several hours later, the doctor walked into the room and told us there was nothing wrong with Casey's lungs, but that we should be on the lookout for any troubling signs. My mom breathed a sigh of relief and said, You said her lungs, yes? No, I don't think that's right. She's here because she couldn't remember something. Something important. What was it? Oh yes. She was here because she couldn't remember her older brother at all. Why were you looking at her lungs? I'm sorry, ma'am, but Casey is here because she started loudly wheezing. That's what you said on the intake paperwork, and that's what Casey says too. If you'd like, we can do the head images, but it will take a while. My mother was a very stubborn woman when it came to Casey, and as such, I expected her to argue with the doctor profusely. But instead, she slumped back into her chair and muttered something about needing more vacation days. The drive home was quieter than the drive to the hospital, mostly because Casey had reached her limit and fell asleep in the car before we could pull out of our parking spot. When we got home, I realized my mom was carrying Casey to bed when normally that would be my job. In fact, she was acting like I wasn't there at all, as if this day couldn't get any worse. As soon as my mom finished putting Casey to bed, I gave her a hug full of as much warmth as I could and said, "I love you, Mom." She hugged me back with some hesitation and said, "I love you too." There was a brief pause as she tried to remember my name. Trevor. I shut myself in my room. I emptied my backpack of all my school supplies and filled it with clothes before considering my small room for one last moment. If I could stay longer, I would, but I knew that my mother, if she could still even notice me, wouldn't remember me. There was nothing here for me other than the constant reminder that I had been completely erased. I got into my car and just drove north. I don't know why, but I feel compelled to do so. My job had left me with enough money to live on the road for about a month. One night, when I was lying in the back seat of my car trying to sleep, I was fiddling around with the junk on the floor when I saw it. A small piece of paper reading, "Meet me at L's later, Carla." I can't remember when she had passed it to me, but Carla was a big fan of slipping me notes in class like she was in grade school. I could have jumped for joy. Whatever had done this was not omnipotent. It had missed something in its race to destroy evidence. I didn't know what was north, but possibly I could do something to it and make it give me my life back. I fell asleep with the paper in my hand. About a week into the journey, I stopped eating fast food. The cashiers stopped responding to me when I stood in line, and it seemed like nothing I could do would make them notice me. Instead, I was living off bottled water and bologna sandwiches I would make in the back of my car. While I was carrying my groceries back to my car, I pulled out of the Walmart parking lot when I saw a different classmate running in a straight line. I could only see their back, and I sped out of the parking lot and into a busy street in an attempt to catch up, and was hit by oncoming traffic. I fled from my car without bothering to bring anything and went on foot. In the minute I had to get myself out of the car, they had vanished, even when I continued to sprint after them for blocks. I decided to ditch my car and continue north on foot. That night, I walked into a gas station and grabbed whatever I felt like and walked out. The person behind the counter didn't look up from their phone. This brazen theft didn't happen often after that. The periods of time I needed to sleep and eat seemed to be less and less as time went on, and I foggily realized that at some point I had been sprinting in a straight line for days without rest. I don't know how long it has been since I left, and I've made it to a small town that stands on the edge of a dense forest. To be honest, I cannot tell you what occurred during this time period. I can't really remember much of anything. I was lucky I chose to write a description of the event immediately after I left. I read it several times a day now. There are names underlined in the text, and I can tell through context they were important to me. But now there's not a single face that comes to mind when I read them. I can barely remember my own name. It starts with a T, that's all I know. Tomorrow I set off for further north on a suicidal mission, but first, my past self had very adamantly written a note asking me to transcribe and post this somewhere. I vaguely remember something about online posts getting deleted, so I don't think it will work. I decided to take the written description along with some notes I added and mail it to the home address on the driver's license I have. I hope my memory is good enough that I can go letter by letter to write the address because I can't seem to hold words in my mind for very long. The urge to go north has somewhat subsided since I made it to this town, Or maybe the subconscious desire to have other people know my story had finally staved it off. Whatever the case, I hope I can steal some stamps easily. So for now, this is T signing off, permanently. The desire to die with a shred of my identity intact is one of two things I can still remember. The other is a fear of forgetting absolutely everything. One last thing. I can't remember it clearly, but I saw her in this town 3 or 4 days ago. The girl, Carly, I think, who disappeared. She was walking around with strange, jerky movements. People were ignoring her like they did to me. Eventually, either I spoke out or she noticed that someone else could see her, and she whipped around, and I saw her face. I can't remember the details, but it looked like someone had peeled her face off and stitched a new one on.